yeah, maybe what I need to think more about is what updating rule do I want to commit to, and how could that deal with this problem? But the second response is, I think it actually might be an interesting reason for us to just lower the bar for the Lockean thesis. So maybe we set the bar at like 0.5 or even like slightly below 0.5. And I think if we do that, we can maintain our beliefs but lower our credences a good amount in response to even strong disagreement. So basically the thought is, I don't necessarily commit to a particular credence updating rule. I'm open to the idea that we might not have to just split the difference every time, and we might not conciliate that much. And again, it's also going to depend on how reliable and how good of evidence the other person has as well. But I think one thing that would be interesting to explore more is a Lockean view on which the bar for rational belief is quite low. So that's more sort of my response to the first horn in ways that I think you can at least get a good amount of belief steadfastness, but maintain the Lockean thesis. But I do acknowledge too, there's different versions of my view depending on like how conciliatory or how steadfast you want to be. And if you maintain the Lockean thesis, that's going to be sort of on the more conciliatory side of the different versions of my view. So horn number 2 would be that the Lockean thesis is false, and then the problem here is that this seems to lead to clearly irrational sets of attitudes. So you believe P but have like a super low credence in P. And I guess one thing to say about this is I think your examples, I have the intuition more clearly that those are irrational, but what about cases where you believe P but have like a 0.45 credence in P? And actually this was related to some of the cases that I actually didn't end up getting to talk about in the presentation because I ran out of time, but one of the cases that Hawthorne gives to kind of motivate this is, let's say there's a 3-horse race. Horse number 1 has like a 40% chance of winning. Horse number 2 has like a 20% chance of winning. Horse number 3 has like a 20% chance of winning. That doesn't add up to 1, but whatever. One horse is like below 0.5, but slightly or significantly higher, and then the other 2 are significantly below 0.5. And Hawthorne says it doesn't seem irrational to believe the horse will win even though your credence in that is below 0.5. And Martin Smith also has a book called Between Probability and Certainty, where he thinks that belief in low credence is actually the right response to like the preface paradox. He thinks you can believe the conjunction of all the claims in your book, but you should have a low credence in it. He also has these cases that are sort of the inverse of the classic statistical evidence cases, where you have good testimonial evidence someone committed some crime, but then you learn that's very unlikely given the base rates. I know I'm going through these very quickly, but the point is just there is some interesting cases that I think put pressure on this idea that we have to have like a high credence or even a credence above 0.5 in order to be rational. And so even if you wanted to rule out like believing P and having like a 0.1 credence in P, you could, I think, tell a background story about rational belief and rational credence that would rule out the very extreme combinations, but let you have a credence in like the 0.4 or even 0.3 range and nonetheless continue to rationally believe. So I'm at least personally open to that. I don't think you have to accept that in order to accept my view, but I think that's kind of where I would want to go here. And then response 2, I've kind of already covered already, but the thought is simply because we deny the Lockean thesis doesn't mean that anything goes. So this will depend on your background story between rational belief and rational credence, and I haven't had a chance to really spell out the different views that are non-Lockean, but Martin Smith has a normic support view, Laura Bouchek has a view, there's different views here that will say, rational belief isn't rational credence above some threshold, but we can still rule out cases where you believe P and have a super low credence in P, kind of because of some other background facts. So anyway, I know that was brief, and I want to think more about other ways I can respond to this as well, because I think it's a really good place to push back, but that's some at least preliminary responses. So thank you so much for your comments. Oops.
All right, wonderful. Great, thank you, Francesco and Sophia. Thank you, Liz, again for responses. Now let's open it up for questions. If you could use the raise hand function so if you could open up the participants window and hover over or look just below the list of participants. You'll see a raise hand button. And if you do that, I'll start taking a list, and I'll make sure you're in the queue. So Alexander, I saw your hand first. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, thanks for the talk. Hey, I was wondering about one of the kind of motivations for the steadfast view that you mentioned yourself at the beginning of the talk, and how you think you can capture that. So one thing you said was that as a steadfast proponent of a steadfast, you would want to say that we can have not just opinions, but strong opinions on stuff. And I guess you'd want to say maybe in the political domain, you might want to be able to have strong opinions. But having strong opinions, I felt like that can be only about credences, like at least the way you framed the debate, because there's no gradations in beliefs, so they can't be stronger or weaker. So this must mean that you can have really high credences in stuff that's controversial. And I was wondering how that's consistent with the kind of you're pushing. I mean, I see that it's in principle consistent. You could say, well, you have to lower your credences only like minimally, and then you can still be very high up. But I don't know if that, I don't know what you think.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point. And that might just be a case where I need to be more careful about my wording, because I totally agree. Like, I think strong opinion would mean belief in high credence. So maybe a better way of putting it would be like, we can take a stand on controversial matters, or we don't have to be spineless in the face of controversy. We can have views on these controversial matters. But yeah, I do think strong opinion is probably misleading, and probably it would be better to say, I'm not so confident, but I do believe it, I basically just agree. I probably shouldn't have put it exactly that way. And, I mean, again, it's like one of those things where I'm not going to be able to capture everything about the steadfast view that is intuitive, but I'm hoping I can, that's a trade-off with the fact that I can capture these things that are really intuitive about the conciliationist view. So I totally agree. I shouldn't word it that way. So thanks for the question. It's a great question.
Thank you. And El, did you take your question away?
I did not. I just lowered my hand because I saw you wrote my name down.
Oh, wow. Right through the computer. Go ahead, El.
Thanks. So very interesting approach to this issue. And I have the following worry, which is that the normative role of belief falls out of the picture. And here's how I got to it. I got to it by thinking that, okay, so you're allowing for cases where people have middling credences, but beliefs or disbeliefs. And so now when I meet a disagreeing peer, they might actually hold the same credence that I do. And now I don't really care if they disagree with me. What I care about is their credence. Because if you tell me, I disagree with you about whatever controversial matter, and then I learn that you have the same credence as I do, I'm relieved. I'm actually quite happy. It sounds like we're seeing eye to eye. So I had that thought, and then I was pulling on that thread a little bit, and I came to a set of questions, so maybe you can help me with those.
Yeah.
The questions have to do with the normative role of belief. So what normative role does belief have left? When would you call me irrational when my credences, in fact, fit my evidence? And perhaps relatedly, when it comes to rational action, which of the two do I follow? Do I follow my credence, or do I follow my belief, or some combination of those? I don't know. So that's the set of questions that I have, but now you see where they're coming from. So I'll stop now.
No, that's great. This is some stuff I need to think more about, and I think these are really good places to push back. So yeah, I mean, one thing that's interesting, and I haven't explicitly committed to this, but I do think it probably would fall out of a lot of versions of my view, is like there's cases where you start off disbelieving P and I start off believing P, and then if we're like doing what I say that you should do in response to disagreement, we both end up like having the same credence but opposite beliefs, So, do I want to definitely, like, I don't think you have to accept that that's possible to accept a version of my picture, but it does seem kind of to fall out of it, at least a lot of versions of it. So that's an interesting, so one thing that I think is super interesting that I hadn't thought about before, but I think is really good and I want to think more about, is if you do meet someone with the same credence but a different belief attitude, how should that affect your attitudes, if at all? And I guess, I mean, it's open to me to say, like, that, is there any, like, what would be bad about saying, like, that could affect your credences? Maybe, yeah, I need to think more about whether that would just lead me to say something bad that I don't want to say, because I have been a little hand wavy about what's the exact updating rule that we should follow, and would that only be, like, because you could have an updating rule where the input is only credences and then the output is only credences, but you could have an updating rule where the input is both beliefs and credences, and then that tells you how to change your credences. So maybe that, I don't know, I need to think more about whether that would lead to things I'm not happy with, but that's a potential way you could go. But yeah, that's a really interesting question. And then, yeah, the question about rational action is really interesting too. So this is actually something that I think has been raised just to dualism in general. It's like, if we have both beliefs and credences, which one should we act on? How does that work? And I think, so different dualists have given different stories. So there's, I guess, at least two popular stories, and I want to think more about which one would fit better with the view that I'm defending. So one story is that beliefs enable us to sort of rule out error possibilities and low stakes reasoning. So we rely on our beliefs when the stakes are low, but then we move to, like, the more precise attitude credences when the stakes are higher. And I think that view is interesting, but I don't know if that view fits as well with what I'm saying here, especially because I want to think about situations, especially disagreement, when like it comes to, like, you know, core matters of our beliefs, like these core commitments that we have. And so the other view that I was thinking about that's kind of interesting, but I don't know if I agree with it or not, but I think it fits better with this view, is Laura Bouchak's view, where beliefs actually have an important role to play in the reactive attitudes that credences can't play. So beliefs play this role in our practices of praise and blame. So Bouchak says, when someone does something wrong, you first decide, you take a stand on whether they did that wrong thing. You don't just form a credence. You believe it or you don't, and then you punish them in accord to how bad that thing is, and then maybe the same for praising as well. So I think that view might fit a little better with my view, where when it comes to praise and blame, beliefs play this crucial role that credences can't. And then I think that would fit better with saying the belief lets you, like, take a stand on these important matters, like whether someone's guilty of something. And then, yeah, I guess then you would also need another story about what credences are doing. Maybe credences just aren't playing a role in those cases. I mean, you could have a view on which, like I've said, credences track your level of evidential support, and then if you think there is some connection between belief and credences, the credence would tell you when you should give up that belief. But yeah, I want to think. I want to think more about rational action and how that would fit into this picture in particular, because I've liked both of those two different views, the simplifying view and the morality view of how belief and credence play into rational action, but I haven't thought about it specifically in terms of this paper. So that's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One further note, if there are any fingers, like follow-ups on a prior question, let me know in the chat and I'll move you up to the relevant point in the queue. Next, I had Hillary, if you still have your question.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot, Liz. It was really interesting. Got tons of questions about all sorts of things. Let me just focus on one. The application at the end of the paper to the issue of belief about various philosophical claims.
Mm-hmm.
And the implication, it seems, of conciliationism, that the vast majority of philosophical beliefs are irrational. And you seem to have quite a visceral reaction to that.
Yeah.
I understand. I mean, you pointed out that we all clearly seem to actually have these beliefs, which I agree is a psychological matter. I mean, I've believed, for example, externalism about justification for a good long time. I'm going to die an externalist, I'm sure. It's a real belief. That's true about my psychology. But I mean, look, I think the chances that all my beliefs are rational is pretty close to zero. And more than that, I think I can actually identify large swaths of belief where it's a really good bet that I'm being irrational. So for example, I mean, it's well known that people by and large have an overly rosy view of their kids. I'll bet I do too. People have by and large an overly rosy view of themselves, and I bet that's true of me too. Sorry, the lights in my office are on a motion sensor. I find out how sedentary I am by the lights constantly turning on. I think I can identify, large swaths of my beliefs, which are, probably pretty irrational. And you may wonder, if I'm so convinced they're irrational, is this just paying lip service to this stuff? Do I really believe that? I do really believe that. And the reason I don't, modify my beliefs in light of my assessment of them is, twofold. I mean, one is beliefs aren't, responsive to the will. It's not quite that easy to change one's beliefs. And also, I mean, much as I'd like to recalibrate, even if my beliefs were responsive to my will, knowing what I should recalibrate to is actually quite difficult. It's possible to know that one's being quite irrational without having a good sense of where one should go in order to recalibrate. So I'm just wondering if you could say a bit more, because I recognized you were pressed for time and this was just an application, but if you could say a bit more about why you think would be so weird to think that, given our psychology, we invest an awful lot of time, our entire careers in certain things, it wouldn't be so surprising if we were irrationally invested in certain sorts of things. What's so weird about that?
Yeah, no, I love it. That's a great question. And I actually, too, I'm very friendly to the idea that we're epistemically Aeocratic in the way you're explaining. Like, there are things that we believe even though we think we shouldn't believe them. And I think philosophers, at least some, tend to overlook that. They think, like, that's impossible or something. But no, I totally think we do that. I agree with, like, yeah, the way you assess, yourself or your children or whatever, definitely possible. But I think I'm a little more hesitant to want to say that that's going on with almost all of our philosophical beliefs. Like, that just seems like a strong claim to me. And I think, yeah, I need to think more about why I think that, but I guess it's like, look, I've been studying this for years. I wrote a dissertation on it. I've considered most of the arguments against it, and I think I have good objections to those. Like, yeah, people disagree with me, and yeah, I am not like as confident as I am that 1 + 1 = 2, that it's true, or anything like that, but yeah, I guess, like, look, there could be cases where you should give up on your philosophical beliefs, right? If someone gives you this super good deductive argument and you're just like, you just can't come up with an objection to it, then yeah, it's irrational for you to continue to hold it. But I think, just zeroing in on the fact that people disagree about it, to me, that's not enough to make it irrational. And I agree with you that, like, it could be like, it's possible that sometimes it's irrational, and it's possible to even believe it and think that it's irrational, but I just can't accept that just the mere fact of disagreement makes almost any view you would have in philosophy irrational. So, and yeah, I think too, like, you need a story about why it seems good to defend these views and why it seems good to assert these views. And that doesn't, I mean, I don't know, I'm curious if you think that's irrational too, or maybe that's just, you have like an epistemic consequentialist kind of story where it leads to good epistemic outcomes, but it's like irrational in some like deontological sense. Yeah, I mean, I want to think more about this. Like, I haven't really read a ton on the literature on what views we should take to our favorite philosophical views. So I want to think more about it, but just kind of off the cuff. I don't want to say that all of them are irrational. So yeah.
Thanks.
Terrific. Stephanie?
I have a question on page 5 of your presentation. There you say if you are a dualist, then there are these 4 options concerning what should change in cases of peer disagreement. So either credence and belief change, or neither of them change, or credence changes but not belief, or the other way around. And then I thought, couldn't there be a 5th option, namely credence changes, and then depending on how much credence changes, either also the belief should change or it shouldn't. And that, so if that's a 5th option, that would be, I think then you don't get the first horn of Sophia's and Francesco's dilemma.
Yeah. So now, sorry, let me look at their handout again really quick. Could you say briefly why that helps with the horn? Sorry, now I'm like, where's their handout? Oh, here it is. Okay.
Because then you don't have to say that. So I thought your solution is that in cases of peer disagreement, you change, the credence changes, but the belief never changes.
Yeah, or at least, I mean, yeah, the belief doesn't change in response to the disagreement facts. And I think I actually maybe didn't mention this explicitly in the presentation, so thanks to Francesca for saying it. But I think what I say in the paper is that it would change for coherence reasons, but not change because of the disagreement itself. And then they were pushing back, I guess, to say like, but wouldn't the disagreement be like the ultimate reason? But I guess the thought was supposed to be that like, if you go below that Lockean threshold, then you will, you should give up the belief. So maybe part of what you're suggesting is I'd be a little bit more, well, conciliatory, and say that the belief could change in response to disagreement. So, but that just depends on how much the credence changes. Yeah. Is that the thought? Yeah. No, that's, I mean, I want to be open to that. I think the reason that, the reason that I wouldn't wholeheartedly embrace that or make that my main view is because I think that is a pretty conciliatory view, and it might not as easily capture some of the things about steadfastness that I would like to capture. But it does depend on what the rule is for how the credence changes and then how the belief should follow. So I think you could have a version of that where, it can be steadfast, at least to an extent. So I think in a way, that is one of the views that I want to consider. And I guess, I mean, you're just being more specific about it. And so maybe the main difference is you're saying the belief is sensitive to the disagreement. It just isn't as sensitive as the credence or something. Is that maybe a way of thinking about it? So yeah, that's I guess a way, I think, a version of the view that would, I think, fall on the more conciliatory spectrum, but I'm very open to that kind of thing potentially. But I am worried that like it would be more spineless potentially than maybe other views. But yeah, it's a good question.
No, am I still? Oh, good. Arturs?
Yeah, hi. Thanks. I really enjoyed your talk. Great stuff. Yeah, I have a question. Could you say a bit more about that spinelessness objection? So like one of the motivations we could want to be steadfast is that, from what I understood, is that you don't want to go around and change your beliefs every time you encounter someone who disagrees with you, right? Just because you meet a Trump supporter, you don't want to change your beliefs of Biden one, right? Right. So and then you don't want to go back if you meet a Biden supporter and to the opposite, right? Okay, so that's I see the motivation, and so and I see the problems that could that arises from this for views which are more conciliatory. But so my question and perhaps a worry is, isn't there a parallel kind of worry for your view as well with respect to credences? I guess the same motivation we have, same intuition we have behind this spinelessness cases for belief could reappear in cases of credences, right? If you have 0.9 credence that Biden won and you meet a Trump supporter, you don't want to lower your credence straight away, and then, but if you if you lower, you don't want to go back to 0.9 just because you meet someone who disagrees. So it seems that kind of spinelessness feature reappears with respect to credences as well, right? And so it's not just you get rid of this by saying that beliefs are unaffected, and yeah. So yeah, you see the point, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a nice point, and I mean, this is part of the thing that does crop up when you're trying to make two very opposed parties happy. So part of me is like, I do think there's some truth in what you're saying, but maybe I'll try to soften it a little bit. So when I think about like spinelessness and the problem that causes, it is a little weird to think about it in terms of credences, just because, with the exception of credence 1 or credence 0, credences don't, and I think this is because I buy those rules for belief and credence I was talking about earlier, but credences don't really amount to taking a stand. They kind of amount to saying like, this is likely, or like my evidence supports this, or, you know, I have good evidence for this, like that kind of thing. But it's not clear that like even a high credence would be like planting your flag down and like having a view of something, you know? And so I guess for me, when I think about what a belief is, I do think that is kind of like having a spine. You're planting your flag down, you're saying, this is my view. But then when your credence kind of moves around, I guess I just don't personally have the same intuition that like, because they're so fine-grained and because they come in degrees, you're not like having the spine that you then give up, you know? It's just kind of like moving around depending on your evidence. So I at least think, look, because I want to cater to conciliationists to an extent, there is going to be some level of spinelessness in the view. So I agree with you on that. But I think credences are much more suited, and it's much less problematic to move your credences around, when I think belief is really the thing that I think would give you that spine that lets you sort of take a stand on the controversial matter. But that said, I agree that like there is a extent of spinelessness in the view, and that's just, I think, part of what it means to cater to conciliationists.
Right, but yeah. So you don't want to say like in one day you could go from credence 0.9 to 0.1 and then back again to 0.9. But yeah. That would be,
I mean, yeah, that would be the most extreme version of the view. And was it Stephanie she was talking about a view that I think would be like on the other end of the spectrum, and then that would be the view that's like on the whole other opposite end of the spectrum, where it's like your credence can be anything and you can keep believing. And again, like I don't want to just say like I totally rule that view out, but like even the most extreme people that think belief and credence just come apart, that would be even really controversial for them. So you might think like it's 0.9 one day, then it's 0.7, then it's 0.4, then it's back to 0.8, you know, so it's at least staying in this range that's like closer to the belief, and then once it gets so low, then you give up that belief. But that's, I mean, so that's probably the version of the view that I would probably like the best, is like you can still get in the 0.4 range, but you're not going to get to like the 0.1 range probably. So yeah.
Great. Luis?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. That was great. I was just going to follow up on Stephanie's suggestion. So the Lockean thesis, the more problematic direction of it is from the high credence to the belief, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, it's totally compatible with your view to hold on to the other direction, right? That it's a necessary condition for the rationality of belief, that it's rational also for you to have a high credence. And what I was going to say is that I think that so you want to give both the steadfast and the conciliatory intuitions their due, right?
Yeah.
But I think that even those who think we should give the steadfast intuition its due, that has got to have a limit of sorts, right? And so I think it would be on spot to combine it with that direction of the Lockean thesis, which is, as you said, by the way, compatible with dualism, because the issue is just that there's like a range of credence lowerings that are vindicated by pure disagreement, where it's still rational to hold on to your original belief. But that's gotta have a limit. Like if all my peers tell me that, I don't know, that Biden won in their Sophia's and Francesco's example, right? There will be a point where being steadfast, now it's just irrational for me to do it. And that's exactly the point where my credence lowering has dipped below the threshold in the Lockean thesis.
Yeah, good. No. Yeah, I mean, to both you and Stephanie, like I totally agree. And I think this would be like a nice way of going for people that I guess two things is true of. One, they do think belief and credence are more closely normatively connected, and then two, they're more conciliationist about things. And it's also going to depend on where you put that threshold, right? Because I had suggested like 0.6, and then I think in response to the comments, they were pushing back on that a little bit, and I was like, well, you could even put it at like 0.5 or something. So, and also, I think I didn't maybe emphasize this as much as I could. You can also have a threshold that varies in context to context, right? So you could have the threshold is lower in like some disagreement cases for whatever, but then it's higher in other cases. And I think actually more people like the moving threshold view than they like the fixed threshold view. So I think there's a number of options here. And yeah, maybe you're right that like I'm too worried about conceding to steadfasters, although I presented this to them and they're like, you're conceding too much to the conciliationists, you know. So I think like both sides are like, why are you, you know, or even what is it, Arthur's was saying like, isn't this still spineless in a way? So I do think, you know, I've tried to give a spectrum of views that fall under my view so you can kind of make it more steadfast or more conciliationist. But yeah, I do think if you're kind of more inclined for a more conciliationist view anyway. And yeah, I mean, I think there is some, like, I do think there is a limit to how steadfast we should be, right? Then yeah, I totally agree that this would be the version of the view you should go in for. So great question to both of you.
Excellent. Adam?
Yeah, so I just have a really basic question because I really don't work in this field or this area. Has anyone made an argument for dualism yet on the basis that our like theory of mind systems seem to track something like credences independently of belief states? Is that already a thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. It almost sounds like it would be a partially empirical argument, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Oh, it would be like an entirely empirical argument. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, and I have a paper, it's called How Belief Credence Dualism Explains Away Pragmatic Encroachment. And I go into some of the empirical stuff there. And actually, sorry, I probably should have not even brought that up first. Jonathan Weisberg has a paper that's called Belief in Scientology. And it is an entirely empirical argument for dualism. It's been like a year or two since I've read it. I mean, one thought, and this is obviously controversial and I'm not up on all the empirical stuff, but there's the two systems model that some people like. I know that some people now don't like that, but that would be like a really rough sketch of like beliefs are associated with system 1 reasoning, credences are associated with system 2 reasoning.
Oh yeah, no, that's not. I mean, I see why someone would do that. That doesn't sound right, but
okay, sure. No. I mean,
okay, no, but it seems like, I mean, it's, as soon as I heard this, like this idea that there are two different mental states, it makes perfect sense because I think that it seems like we have a lot of good reason to think that our the systems that support our judgments about these track them independently. Yeah, no, I'm gonna have to look into this now. Fantastic talk, by the way. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank you. Yeah,
good.
I highly recommend checking out the Weisberg paper.
Yeah.
And I can even send that to you. It's in fill and print, but it's entirely empirical, and it's a very good paper. I know people that weren't dualists before and then like just converted them. So you should definitely check that out.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely going to.
Great
Thank you.
question. Yeah.
I guess I have a finger on that. And this also is relevant to what you had to say. Am I live? Yeah. What you had to say in response to y'all. So you very quickly, and in the paper, your Phil quarterly paper that you just referenced in more detail, mentioned that in cases of pragmatic encroachment, or perhaps other kinds of cases, it's rational to act on the credence, but not the belief, even though the belief is itself rational. And one question I have in regard to that position is that part of what it is to have a belief is to have your dispositions oriented in a certain way. To believe P is to be disposed to act on P, assert P, and draw inferences from P. And so if you concede that a belief is rational, but it's not rational to act on it, then you're saying that the disposition to act is rational, but the firing of the disposition or the manifestation of it or something is not rational. And there's something that sounds a little odd about that. So it's the disposition that's constitutive of belief is rational, but you shouldn't, the disposition should not go live. And it seems like if you're saying the disposition should not go live in those circumstances, it's not a rational disposition to have in those circumstances. Now, I know that this isn't targeting a specific thesis that you were arguing for, perhaps here, but maybe it is in cases of disagreement. I mean, I'm not sure, but anyway, you can see how there is this concern.
Yeah. So I have so much to say about this. But yeah, so I mean, I guess I'll start with some cases. So this is like kind of deep in the weeds of pragmatic encroachment literature stuff, but I find like the Brown cases like very compelling. So Brown has a set of cases, one of which is, so you're, let's say you were born in England and you have no reason to think otherwise, and you even have like a birth certificate, your parents have told you your whole life, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're offered a bet on which you get $10 if you're born in England, and you're tortured for the rest of your life if you weren't born in England. And like, I just have this strong intuition. It's like, the belief is rational, no reason to give up the belief, but you should not act on that belief. And then there's like less, like, there's less philosophers' cases of this too. It's like, one case is you have a ton of evidence someone is cheating on their spouse, like your coworker maybe or something, their spouse is cheating on them, to the point where it's like clearly rational for you to believe that, but you just don't think you're confident enough to go tell that person until that evidence is like almost to the level of proof. So I find these cases compelling. I know that not everyone does, but I do think part of like the other reason why I think you could rationally have a belief but not act on it is, I'm not saying that beliefs aren't associated with dispositions at all, but I wouldn't say that I'm like a dispositionalist about belief. So I tend to think maybe beliefs are associated with tendencies, but not like tightly tied to dispositions. And part of the reason I think that is because of these cases where I think the stakes are just so high, there's no reason, your evidence totally supports this, there's no reason to give up that belief, but you should act on your credence instead. So that's, I'm curious what you think about cases like that.
I mean, I certainly agree that in these cases where it's, your life is on the line, you shouldn't act in accord with perhaps your belief. But I worry about distance. Well, so when philosophers of mind weigh in on the nature of belief, it's almost unanimous that the state of belief is a state that believing P is a matter of being disposed to act on P. And so saying that belief does not involve that disposition in some sense. Now, I suspect that you could refine the disposition in some way. So I suspect that further conceptual analysis could like resolve the worry. It's just the one that kind of jumps out.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, so and when it comes to dispositionalist views, I said I'm not sympathetic to views where at least like belief is a disposition. But the one view I do like is Declan Smithy's view, where belief is like a disposition to mentally assert something. And I think that view is consistent with the thought that my disposition is like this mental one, but I still maybe like I can even mentally assert like I was born in England, but I still shouldn't act on that in the sense that I should take the bet. So that said, I guess that view could capture a dispositionalist view while still getting the verdicts that I want about these cases. But yeah, I don't like views on which belief just is a disposition to act, and then there's no kind of exceptions or anything. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
More dispositions are included.
Yeah, for sure.
I won't say more.
That's a good question, though. Yeah.
Hillary, you raised your hand. It disappeared. Is your hand?
Yeah, my hand's still there. It's just not visible.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the spinelessness issue that came up earlier. The spinelessness objection to conciliationism. So it's not as if I think that conciliationism has no implications for ways in which we should change our attitudes. I think it clearly does, and that we should be, by and large, more humble about our evidential situation and less confident about many of the things we believe than we in fact are. But the suggestion of spinelessness, of course, goes quite a bit further than that. So I thought I'd just take a concrete example and see what you think about this. So for example, in the United States, over the last 15 or so years, I think the views that white people have, by and large, of the behavior of police towards African Americans has changed dramatically. And I think it's changed dramatically in part as a result of all sorts of cell phone evidence, in which African Americans have recorded their interactions with police over and over again. And it's provided an education for a huge swath of people in the United States, and most especially the white population. And now think about the situation of an African American in this country, the United States, prior to all this cell phone evidence, where they believe that the police badly mistreat African Americans, and they recognize that the majority of people in the country, the overwhelming majority of people in the country, just given the demographics, believe otherwise. I think this is the very sort of thing that people who charge conciliationists with spinelessness would suggest, yeah, it's a deeply held belief, but it's the restaurant case on steroids. You got, an overwhelming percent of the population who sees things otherwise than you do, and so you ought to give it up. But I don't think in that particular case it would suggest anything like that at all, because in that kind of case, of course, there's good reason for the African Americans to recognize that they have a kind of evidence that the white population doesn't.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So it doesn't cause them to be spineless at all. And I think in lots of these kinds of situations where there are big differences in numbers, not the philosophy case, by the way, but where there are big differences in numbers about deeply held moral and political beliefs, there's lots of reason for people on one side, despite the numbers. I mean, I don't care how many Trump supporters I see, that's not going to change my opinion about what the outcome of the election was. And I think that's not irrational. It's not because I'm, this isn't one case in which I think I'm being irrational. They're not my peers. They just aren't. And I've got good reason to believe that. That's not a matter of, some irrationality on my part. So I guess I'd like to hear more about why you think that if you're a conciliationist, there is some real worry about spinelessness. I mean, that, by the way, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, that term, by the way, really does have a moral tinge to it. Mm-hmm. And I think that the real worry about those kinds of cases is primarily about moral and political beliefs.
Yeah.
But it slops over into, you know, clearly non-moral beliefs as well. But I'm just not seeing the worry about spinelessness, much as I do think, if you're a conciliationist, you should probably think, you know, most of us are probably a bit more confident about a lot of what we believe than we ought to be. And then there are some areas where, you know, like philosophy, where where we ought to pull back quite a bit.
Yeah, great question. So yeah, I think like there's a couple of things to that question. I mean, one is just the point that we should be more epistemically humble, and I agree with that too. But then the second point I think has to do with this idea that some people just have radically different evidence than other people. And I think that's a really important thing to note, and I think that's an important way that the conciliationists can kind of get around the spinelessness thing in certain cases. And I totally agree that that's a good move and a move they should be making. But I guess my worry would be that there are other cases where the difference in evidence doesn't seem so stark, but it still seems like it would be spineless to give up the belief. So you could think about someone who has this firm conviction that like eating meat is wrong, for example, and then they encounter people that are aware of the same arguments as they are, have the same similar, almost the same evidence that they do, and I think eating meat is perfectly fine, you know, and that's I think more of the case that, I mean, at least for me, I would be concerned with. Maybe those who know about the spinelessness thing as well would have other cases that they would want to put forward. But that seemed like the kind of case where I would want to say, you know, I can continue in my conviction that eating meat is morally wrong and continue to defend that, continue to hold that view, continue to assert that, even in the face of really smart people that have a different view on that than me. So I totally agree that like the African American case with the cell phone evidence, it would be, you could tell a story there that I think would enable you to continue to have the spine, which is that they just don't have that evidence. But then I would worry about other cases where it seems like the people I'm disagreeing with do have the same evidence or very similar evidence that I do. So.
Thanks.
Yeah, but great question. It's a good point.
I don't have anybody else on. Ariana Albo, please. And maybe this will be our last question, given time.
Okay, cool. Sorry, my internet's kind of choppy, so hopefully I don't freeze. Thanks so much. This is super interesting, and I'm really liking the discussion so far. So I wanted to ask a question about the application to the rationality of philosophical beliefs. So it seemed like some of the motivation for why you might want to be a steadfaster, you talk about like the epistemic benefits of disagreement. Mm-hmm. And I haven't read the stuff you're citing there, but one thing you might mean by that is like, you know, when juries are comprised of people from diverse perspectives and they have, you know, they disagree on different issues, they come to the table with different beliefs, they'll like deliberate longer and they're more likely to come to accurate conclusions. So that might be one thing. But I was thinking like in the case of philosophy, I wonder if it's like belief per se that always needs to be doing that work, mm-hmm. so much as just like, you know, people coming up with smart objections or playing devil's advocate. Because it feels like, you know, I could not even believe a view, but still be like, you know, this is like still my favorite and I want to try to defend it the best I can. So it seems like you could still get the
but it's related to acceptance, which is just like a commitment to like acting as if some view is true, even if you don't believe it. So I think he actually gives some really interesting and potentially convincing arguments that we could get at least some of these epistemic benefits, even if people are just accepting or endorsing their views, even if they don't believe them. So yeah, I don't have like a ton to say about about that, because I do actually think those are really interesting and good arguments. And I've actually even utilized similar things when I talk about how faith could be rational without belief in some of my other work. But I do think, so maybe one benefit the belief story would have over that is that it just gives you a simpler and more clear explanation, like assertion, for example. You're going to be asserting a lot of things that you don't actually believe. You know, like I think it would, like if you actually believe it, you might have like more motivation and more tenacity to defend it in light of challenges. Even if acceptance can give you some of that, maybe the belief will give you that even more. So I think the bottom line is, like, I think that's a really good point, and I agree. And I just think maybe the belief could give you like more of those benefits, or enable you to kind of hold on to those benefits for longer than the acceptance view. But yeah, I think that's an important challenge, and there is interesting work being done there. So great question.
All right. Well, if you'd all like to unmute your mics, I think it's a really nice thing if we can all hear each other clap at once. So let's go ahead and thank Liz for...
Thank you all so much for coming, and awesome feedback. I was writing everything down. I guess it's also being recorded too, but I will definitely be incorporating this and giving you all footnotes of thanks. So I really appreciate it. And I'm honored to be able to kick off this series. So thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Liz. And thank you all for coming and participating. It's speaker plus participants that makes a great event. So everybody's contributions are a fantastic addition. So we hope to see you at future concept events. Luis has posted a link in the chat to a future one with Catherine Hawley, scheduled for next month. So, all right. Well, have a good evening or morning or afternoon, depending on relevant time zone. Thanks again.
That was today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Tune in for the next episodes of Figments of the Brain on our SoundCloud page. It's soundcloud.com/brainfigments, or find the podcast on our homepage at www.concept-phil.de.